Okay, so let's talk Reconstruction. Um, it's by far one of the most interesting times in American history, and to me, one of the most interesting places to do historical research because the claims about the time period are so dramatic and so tropish. And so basically, however you slice it, typically Reconstruction is presented as a tragedy. So the Civil War is all about heroism. Everybody's a good guy. Even Confederates, are fighting for a cause. Even though we may dislike and disagree with their cause, they're still noble in their heroism. Nobody wants to say a bad word about Robert E. Lee. The only person who maybe gets the people who get talked about negatively are Northern Democrats or maybe Ulysses S. Grant for being a quote unquote butcher. But then again, he went on to be a two-time president, so how bad could he be? And then Reconstruction is this tragedy, and right, with any tragedy there needs to be hope. And in the case of Reconstruction, usually that hope is in radical Reconstruction. The very beginning years of Reconstruction, when Congress amended the Constitution 3 times with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, when Congress passed the Bureau of created the Bureau of Freedmen, Abandoned Lands, Refugees, usually known as the Freedmen's Bureau, when Congress passed civil rights acts, when whites and blacks in the South worked together to try to transform the South. And basically, the concept here is about racial justice, racial equality, trying to come out of the end of slavery. Those are the good guys. And then the tragedy is that that vision of racial equality is betrayed. And it's betrayed by a combination of angry, malevolent Southern whites who try to recreate slavery by another name, who turn to vigilante terrorism in forms of like the Ku Klux Klan. And over time, Northern whites, Northern Republicans, quote unquote, retreat from racial justice. So that's the narrative, mostly following the civil rights movement. That's how historians have written about Reconstruction after the 1960s. Now, in the early 20th century, it was still a time of heroes and villains, just a lot of the roles were reversed. The quote unquote carpetbaggers from the North were the bad guys. They invaded the South after the war to just kind of, in their greedy interest, or in their desire to elevate former slaves, and that was seen as a negative. So, and the victims were not African Americans, but the victims were Southern whites who were being once again wronged again. They were already down and out, and here's the North, the federal government, kind of pressing on their necks. The reason I find this all kind of interesting then to engage is, of course, life is more complicated than that. A morality play that's fixated on the East Coast, on the South, on the North-South binary leaves out a lot that's going on. And so things like the Transcontinental Railroad, which gets completed, or how does California reconstruct itself? California is interesting because there's Native Americans, there's Asian Americans, African Americans, Mexican Americans. There's just a lot more going on, and the constitutional amendments transform things. There's a great book called American Heathens by Joshua Pattison, who looks at basically how all of the changes in Reconstruction push and transform California. There's also this place called Utah that experiences Reconstruction differently because of the issues of polygamy, and the Republican Congress kind of attacks the territory of Utah, and it's when Mormons use polygamy there. But basically, the morality play gets in the way of doing good, sound historical scholarship. Abraham Lincoln is not a hero, and Ulysses S. Grant is a villain. They're people who are making decisions that we can evaluate within their contexts. Why did Congress pass the constitutional amendments? Was it because they altruistically wanted to help African Americans, these largely Northern whites? Was it a desire to create a Republican Party in the South? Yes, yes, yes. There's lots of reasons people were doing what they were doing. So as you look into Reconstruction, and what I'm going to have you do is watch kind of cinematic portrayals after the fact, I want you to think about, why is Reconstruction portrayed as such a morality play rather than nitty-gritty history? And then if we were to just approach it more at the mundane of life, where everyday people are doing the best they can in their circumstances, sometimes doing wonderful things, sometimes doing horrible things, how might we approach the study of Reconstruction um, differently than in just that kind of overly dramatic tragedy?